morning, everyone from IIT Gandhinagar. We are very happy to welcome again Dr. Vinayachandra, who is well known for being a proponent of Indian traditions of yoga and psychology. And yesterday, he took us through the various sources of yoga, the term itself, the major objectives given in the classical texts. And I think today he will draw us more into the technical aspects and the practical aspects of this vast set of disciplines that go by the name of yoga in India. And of course, throughout this, we see the interweaving with the Sanskrit language and Sanskrit-based concepts. So you can see his entire profile on our website, itgn.ac.in. I'm sorry, IKS.itgn.ac.in. And I will not repeat it here. And with this brief introduction, Dr. Vinayachandra, please take over.
Namaste, and warm greetings to all of you who have joined us here and who also joined us online. We'll continue our discussion from yesterday. Just to do a quick recap of what we looked into, we started with a broad categorization of the development of yogic thought and practice into three levels or three phases. Broadly, the ancient or the Vedic period, Vedic, Upanishadic, all covered in one. Then second was the classical era, where we were looking into the Yoga Sutra text per se, and the later part, which we will see today. So these were the three phases in which we were looking into the spread and development of yogic thought first. Then we started off with the definition, or rather even before that, the etymology of the term yoga, tracing its roots to two root sounds, yujir and yuj, meaning to unite and to dissolve. Yujir yoge, to yoke, to bring things together. And the other one is yuj samadhav, to dissolve the lower existence into a higher existence, so on and so forth. And then we also looked into some important definitions, starting from the Kathopanishad, sthiram indriya dharanam. Okay, tam yogamiti manyante, sthiram indriya dharanam. Then one from the Shvetashvataropanishad, yujevam brahma purvyam, let us unite with that higher consciousness Brahma. So that idea. And then from the Gita, two from the Gita, samatvam yoga uchyate, the state of being in an equanimous condition is yoga. Then yogaha karmasu kaushalam, a skillful way of performing action is yoga. And we also saw there are more definitions, descriptions of yoga, each chapter titled as yoga, and broadly 4 yogas being presented there, that is Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Dhyana Yoga in the Gita. So that's what we saw. Then we moved on to the classical age, or the age of reason, where we see the blossoming of philosophical systems, right? This was around the 5th century BC, where you see some of these people who are contemporary, the Mahavira, Buddha, Patanjali, perhaps. We don't know much about his time period, but perhaps he was also belonged to that period. And then we see his important text, that is Yoga Sutra. In that context, we also briefly looked into what it means to be a sutra literature. It has those 5 or 6 characteristics, and much of the literature composed in that period has been written in this genre called sutra literature. We saw it for various other systems too, but here in this case, for the Yoga Sutra text being authored by Patanjali, and the very first sutra very clearly delineates its path, saying this is Anushasana. See how words make a bearing. When I call something as Jignasa and Anushasana, they're implying 2 different things. Jignasa is the curiosity to know, to inquire further. But Anushasana specifically, clearly implies that it is for practice. Atha Yoga Anushasanam. Here begins the teaching of the practice of yoga. And the very second sutra it defines yoga. So again, I'm depending on Yoga Sutra text for the definition. And there it says, Chitta Vritti Nirodha. We looked into this sutra briefly. Cessation or stoppage of the movements of the mind is yoga. In that context, we also saw what all could the word vritti mean. Again, falling back on the etymology, falling back on the derivation of the term is helpful. Vritti signifies movement. So you can think it as the movements of the mind. Vritti is something that happens in cycles and circles, a circular movement, not just a plain movement, but also circular movement. So that's also vritti, something that comes back again and again. Third, we also saw that it refers to a pattern, a set way of organizing itself. That is what we call it as a pattern. And even modern psychology affirms that all these activities of the mind, they can be understood in terms of their patterns. That's why we generally use the term patterns to understand the mind, right? So vritti could also mean patterns. And going further, if I just go to the root, vr, which means to cover or to devour. Vrika. Vrika is a fox in Sanskrit. So something who devours. Even this term is symbolically used in the Vedas in many places. Someone who devours light, someone who devours goodness. That's the context, concept it is used as in the Vedas. But here coming back, something that covers up light, something that covers clarity. So it is also the layerings around the clarity of the mind. So we saw all these definitions. So starting from movement of the mind to the patterns of the mind to the layers that cover the mind, all these can be understood by one term, vritti. So it forms an important concept in the Yoga Sutra. Therefore, if I have to understand any concept which is essential for Yoga Sutra, I'll have to really go back to its roots. So some of the important concepts that we discuss here is, I'll list them out and probably explain a couple of them, not more. So the sutra was Chitta Vritti Nirodha, stoppage of the movements of the mind. This is the second sutra. And third sutra, which follows this, is clearly trying to say what happens when you stop these movements. You can actually understand there's a beautiful flow or unfolding of thought that happens through each one of the sutras. In fact, if I show you how it is happening, you can almost predict after a few sutras what could be the next sutra. So it is being put up in such a systematic manner. It tries to address all the curiosities related to the word or the concept which has been used. So here we have used Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is the stoppage of the movements of the mind. Let me know what are the questions you would have the moment you hear this statement. So you would have questions around what are the movements of the mind? Okay. Then what does stoppage mean, or how can one stop? What happens when one stops? What is chitta? These are the probable 3 or 4 questions that will follow immediately after this statement. So he takes up in the third sutra, he says, when the movements are stopped, okay, tada, then drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. Again, it brings us to another important concept here, swarupe avasthanam. The seer or the individual, you remember the Purusha whom we discussed yesterday? Okay, the Purusha or the individual, he resides in his essential form, Swarupa. Swa is his essential nature. Okay, that is his pristine original form. That's where he remains. Tada, when the movements of the mind have been stopped. What happens if it is not stopped? In the normal condition, what we call as normal condition, elsewhere, when the movements have not been stopped. So the fourth sutra explains that part. The third sutra says, tada drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. Itaratra, elsewhere, when the movements of the mind have not been stopped, then vritti sarupyam. See a simple play of words. Swarupa and Sarupa. Swarupa is the essential form. And when the movements of the mind have not been stopped, say I'm watching a movie, I get so involved with the characters there, and I go through all the emotional drama, then that means I have completely identified myself with that character. I am in the identical form with the things that are happening outside. That is sarupya, colored by what is happening. So my eyes are not seeing reality as it is, but it's completely colored with that particular object or experience. It's as though as something that happens to us in our dreams, right? We get into different shapes, different forms, different kinds of activities, different roles, and we get so entangled. Either you are crying or shouting or running away, all these things. That is one of the finest or clear examples of what sarupya means. You get completely entangled. So similarly, when the movements of the mind are not stopped, it completely gets occupied by whatever drama that is happening outside. That is sarupya. Elsewhere, or when the movements are stopped or slowed down, then one will be in swarupa. While the concept is clear, it is also driving home a very significant point here. I want you to notice that. What does swa mean? Swa, self, essential, normal, at home. So what Patanjali is trying to say is, this is your essential form. This is abnormality. Whereas we look things other way around. We consider this to be abnormal state of consciousness. When someone is in deep meditation, when someone has attained a level of concentration, you call it as above normal or abnormal state of being. And being distracted, being lost, that is considered to be normal. Whereas he says this is abnormality. This is normality. This is the essential form. And that is signified only by just these two sounds, swa and sa, right? In such a simplistic manner, but driving home a very profound philosophy. So, Swarupa and Sarupya, these form the first 4 sutras, and they largely cover whatever needs to be said in the Yoga Sutra. Atha Yoganushasanam, Yogaha Chitta Vritti Nirodhaha, Tada, then when the movements are stopped, Drashtuhu Swarupe Avasthanam, the individual resides in his essential form. Elsewhere, Vritti Sarupyam Itaratra, Itaratra, elsewhere, when the movements are not stopped or not slowed down, then the individual identifies himself with everything that is happening outside. Sarupya. So now that he has addressed the curiosity of what happens when Nirodha is done or not done, what is the other important term here in Chitta Vritti Nirodha in that sutra? Obviously vrittis, right? So then he takes that whole set of questions. What is a vritti? How many types of vrittis are there? How do they function? Because if I have to stop them, I need to know how they operate. Unless I know how they operate, I won't be able to gain mastery over them. So next set of sutras deals with it. I'll not go to the details, but I'll just like to add, while saying about the vrittis in the 5th sutra, it makes a broad classification. He says, klishta klishtaha, vrittayaha panchatayyaha, klishta klishtaha. Vrittis are 5-fold. There are 5 types of vrittis. He doesn't say 5 vrittis, 5 types of vrittis, and these vrittis can be broadly classified into klishta vritti and aklishta vritti. Very important, insightful classification. I need to use this concept again and again. Therefore, I'll just spend a couple of minutes here, what it means by it. So he says, any movement that passes through the mind is a vritti. Okay, you're listening, you're perceiving, that is a vritti. You're perhaps imagining something, it's a vritti. Or you're deciding that, okay, let me study the Yoga Sutra text, that is a vritti. Anything that passes, as we saw yesterday, that imagining this space to be the mind space and having 2 doors, one is an entry door and one an exit door. anything that comes in through one is a vritti. Okay. Here he says there are 5 kinds of vrittis that enter through these doors, but they can be broadly classified into 2 types. What are they? Something you can call as klishta vritti and something aklishta vritti. So what does it mean? In simple terms, without going to the technical details, it simply means any movement that just comes and passes without leaving any intense residue, without leaving any trace of its presence. Something that passes is a aklishta vritti, non-painful vritti. I'm using the term klishta in this context, that whether it leaves behind a strong residue or not. To give you an example, while walking up to the classroom, you might have seen 10 things. You might have discussed 4 or 5 things with your friends in a casual manner. By the time you entered, you have already dropped it off, or I assume so, unless you're carrying it inside, right? So whatever just passes through your awareness for a short while, but does not leave behind any strong residue, is an aklishta vritti. It comes, passes by. But there are some experiences when it might even be for a very short period. Look at your own experiences when you have gone through an intense traumatic situations. That experience in terms of time duration might be very short, but that is good enough to leave behind a strong residue inside, right? Whatever leaves behind a strong trace, that is a klishta vritti. So the vrittis can be of 2 kinds. If I make an impact here, then it is a klishta vritti for a while, because it remains. So again, we are not classifying them into good or bad. We are not judging these terminologies. I mean, we are not judging any of these experiences. We are only saying, we are only trying to understand what kind of experience they leave you with. If it is impactful, it is going to stay with you, then it is a klishta vritti. What is not going to stay with you, what has come, passed, and it has just moved on, that is aklishta vritti. So the movement or the whole approach of Yoga Sutra is understand that you go through the vrittis, which are of 2 kinds, klishta and aklishta, consciously move from klishta vritti to aklishta, and from there move to no vritti state. Klishta vritti to aklishta vritti, and from aklishta vritti to no vritti. Low vritti and no vritti. Okay, these are the 4 states. So finally, the state of being where you have no vrittis, that is yoga, or a state where vrittis just they come and pass and they have absolutely no impact on you. So that is the state of yoga, right? So this kind of explanation you can see in just the usage of these 2 terms, klishta and aklishta, broadly classifying vrittis into 2 categories: the klishta, the painful, and the non-painful vrittis. But this is a term and a concept which comes again and again. It's one of the important concepts. So let me also give you 2 more spaces where this term is used and why it is so important. One of the key terms of yoga psychology, the term klesha. Whatever or whichever movement of the mind allows you to develop a klesha. Klesha is a dense pattern of the mind. Okay, see here. If I have to show you this and ask you the difference, what is the difference between these 3 images? The first one, they are a little more organized. There is space in between the lines. And the second one, it's not so well organized as the first, but still there is some spaces, but the number of lines have increased. And in the third, the space has decreased, the lines have increased, and it is less organized, completely jumbled up, right? So this is a klesha. What can be a vritti? So vritti is the first experience. From the vritti, it can just go away, completely evaporate, or it can lead to this state. I want you to fall back on your own experiences, and this is something that is extremely important. Yoga is a tradition, experiential tradition. It is not saying something that does not connect with your experience, or it doesn't make any sense unless you connect it with your experience. In fact, not just yoga, even in one of the important texts of Vedanta, Acharya Shankara very clearly says, Anubhava avasanatvat hi brahmajnanasya. Even the brahmajnana, the highest knowledge, should necessarily culminate in one's experience. If it does not culminate in one's experience, then it's of no use. I can as well go and throw the text out. This is not a textual tradition. I want you to have it very clear. There's a stark difference between a textual tradition and an experiential tradition, a living tradition, right? So here it says that build on your experience. Now fall back and see, of the 100 thoughts that pass through your mind in an hour's time, or if you're more distracted, in 10 minutes time, not all of them lead towards something dense formation. Maybe one or two, or maybe one experience in perhaps week might have had such a strong impact, right? So any vritti has a potential to become a klesha, or to evaporate. So he says, be watchful of those vrittis that can become kleshas. Kleshas are nothing but vrittis in a more dense, unrecognizable patterns. Simple pattern is a vritti, unrecognizable dense pattern is a klesha. Okay, this is a concept that comes again and again in the second chapter, in the second verse, second sutra, and even in the first chapter in another important place. I'm very fond of this place in the Yoga Sutra, so I'll just explain that. That's where you come across the term Ishvara. There is one of the finest definitions of Ishvara. What do we understand by the term Ishvara? The normal general translation is a god. And the moment I use the term God, we have all kinds of notions, someone like a director or a principal who is there to judge you, who is watching you like a CCTV camera and going to give his judgment. Okay, that is not the concept that you come across in the Yoga Sutra. And that is why it becomes so important to really look into this sutra per se. It's one of the finest sutras, I would say, in the Yoga Sutra text. It says, Klesha karma vipaka ashayaihi aparamrishtaha purusha visheshaha ishvaraha. Purusha visheshaha ishvaraha. Those who understand Sanskrit, it's in simple terms. He is a special Purusha. Everyone is a Purusha. All of us are Purushas. Male or female doesn't matter. An individual, a conscious being is a Purusha in this context. Okay? So everyone is a Purusha, but Ishvara is a special Purusha, Vishesha Purusha. And why is he special? He has 4 limbs, or he has 4 hands, 3 heads or 4 heads. Is that the reason for him being special? No. Yoga doesn't discuss any of these things. It says, Aparamrishtaha, he is not limited. He has not been limited by these 4, therefore he is special. Then what are these 4? He says, Klesha. One is by the dense patterns of the mind, by the presence of dense patterns of the mind. Klesha, karma. Karma is your own actions. Vipaka is its consequence. That is in terms of what we call as samskara. Okay? And every action leaves behind a certain impression, that is samskara, and these impressions will create something called as vasana or tendencies. Let me give you an example, then perhaps I'll be able to explain these terms. They appear to be slightly technical, but these are something that you are familiar by your own experiences. You have, okay, this I can connect your childhood experience. Most of you would have liked or would still continue to like ice creams, right? So it has left behind a strong impression, a sense of likability and a sense of wanting it. There's a strong sense of wanting. Okay. When you have had ice cream for the first time or long ago, whatever impression that it left behind is a samskara. Ah, this is good. This is tasty. I'm enjoying it. All these is samskara. The experience that it leaves behind. Is that the end of that experience? No, it doesn't end there. It says it also gives rise to certain tendencies, wanting to go back for that experience. Okay, when an ice cream is getting over, there's already a wish for the next one. You might have noticed that some children, when you give them chocolates, they don't eat. Why? Why do they don't eat? They just keep it. It's not that they don't like it. Even if they like, they just keep it. Why? They think it will be over and they can't have it. Right? So that is the tendency to have it back, to go back to that experience if it was a pleasant experience. If it was an unpleasant, you would want to avoid it. So either avoiding it or the need to go back to it is a vasana. The impression that it left behind, good experience, pleasant experience, nice, fine. That is samskara. The act of eating the ice cream is a karma. And when it gets repeated again and again, it goes to the subconscious level. Like ice cream, of course, I can say it is a more conscious desire, but there are many such desires or aversions which are at the subconscious levels, and that is a klesha. And all our actions as human beings, we are limited by these four. If I'm delivering a lecture here, perhaps I'm motivated by the chance of speaking in an IIT, a strong desire somewhere inside that, oh, I could not study in an IIT, maybe I'll come and give a talk here, or maybe some recognition. So all these could be, or all these will either influence, direct, or determine what I do in my life. So in that way, all of us are caged beings. The klesha, the karma, vipaka, and ashaya. Klesha, karma, samskara, and vasana. Dense patterns, actions, impressions, and tendencies. These four either, I want you to note, influence, direct, or determine what we do in life. Can you imagine a situation where you have, independent of these four, taken a decision? A situation in life when you have done something which is best of the situation, not being mindful of these four, not being influenced by these four, not being bothered about these four, right? It is so difficult. And that's why do we hail Lord Krishna to that level? And if you look at his life and his actions, you can see he was not bound by these four. At some point, he runs away from a war field, right? He gets a name also. What is the name he gets? Ranchhod Das. I don't know if anyone would like to have such a name, a coward. But he does it because he's not mindful of the klesha, he's not mindful of the karma, he does not mindful of the samskara or the vasana. He's not mindful, or he's not worried about what people will call him. He does that because he knows that is the best of the situation. Elsewhere he fights, elsewhere he runs. He's there in Kurukshetra battlefield, but doesn't take to arms himself. He just realizes what is the best of the moment and then acts independently, not being determined by the presence of these four. And therefore we have a beautiful statement in Sanskrit that says, who is an Ishvara? Kartum akartum anyatha kartum samarthaha Ishvaraha. One who is capable of doing, not doing, or doing otherwise is an Ishvara. Okay. So what the situation demands, being able to deliver that is the status of Ishwaratva, not someone who is watching there, looking at your good or wrong deeds, but anyone who can liberate himself, anyone who can exercise that degree of freedom is an Ishvara. And Ishvara, according to yoga, is the one who is not limited by these four. Therefore, he is a special Purusha, and that special Purusha is Ishvara. And see what is happening here. By implication, it's also saying any individual who can outgrow these four is an Ishvara. It's not just one Purusha is an Ishvara, but anyone who can outgrow the gravitational pull of dense pattern, action, impression, and its tendencies can also be a Ishvara. That means potentially everyone is an Ishvara. Because that is a human possibility. If one person has done it, then it means anyone can do it, provided he walks the path. So potentially everyone is in Ishvara. Just by one simple statement, one definition, this concept gets so expanded. Ishvara, right? So similarly, there is also one of the finest definitions of Abhyasa that I have come across in the Yoga Sutra. What does it say? Sato dirghakala nairantarya satkara sevito drida bhumihi. Something that gets firmed up, well grounded in the individual when it is done in this manner. He just uses three qualifying terms there. Dirghakala, something done over a long period of time. Okay, then nairantarya, done with consistency. Third, with intense goodwill. Satkara sevita. Many of us question, complain, and say that, oh, I'm trying to practice yoga, but I'm still not able to touch my own feet. I've tried to touch so many other people's feet, but I'm not able to touch my feet. Okay. Perhaps it's not being practiced from a long time. It's not being done with consistency, or it's not being done by goodwill. All the three elements become extremely important. To do something over a long period of time, to do it consistently and with intense goodwill. Abhyasa then is not limited to yoga practice alone, but anything that we would like to achieve in life. I think this gives you a very insightful guideline of how things need to be pursued, right? And the previous sutra, it says, what tatra sthitau yatno abhyasaha. Tatra, to orient it towards the goal, a conscious exercise or a conscious effort is an abhyasa. So a conscious effort directed towards a purposeful goal, undertaken with consistency over a long period of time and intense goodwill, is a practice. I don't know if I can come across any better definition of abhyasa than this. Okay. So in this manner, Yoga Sutra takes up these important terminologies and tries to explain them. And once you know their meaning in Sanskrit and its implications, you are convinced that there couldn't have been a better way of saying it. Okay. So we have seen Abhyasa, we have seen Ishvara, we have seen Klesha. In the second chapter, there is one whole set of discussion, sutras, which discuss what are the kleshas, how do they operate, what are the modes in which they operate. And this is where he makes a classification between the kleshas that operate at a subliminal level and kleshas that operate at the conscious level, and at what state do you need to deal with them. Can you deal with them when they're at the unconscious level? No. Can you deal with them when they're fully blown up? No. So there needs to be a process where you can bring it to a certain level and that it is conscious, but it is not bothering, and it is the right state when you need to deal with such situations. And this is exactly how in modern psychology also we work with the traumas, okay, or any such intense bad experience. You can't deal it when it's completely unconscious. Especially if you look into the therapeutic approach of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, this is exactly the mode that we take. So that's beautifully explained in the matter of 3 or 4 sutras in the second chapter. That's the whole section on the depth psychology part. Going further, that's all. I don't have much time to spend here, but I'm fast forwarding. I'm going to the next big important framework that yoga provides in this context. It's almost like after the discussion of the first chapter and initially in the second chapter, a restless student is asking, I understand you're saying, but these seem to be at this point slightly higher concepts. Let me know where I can begin a practice as a beginner. Okay. And it is in that context, Patanjali says, then if you need a well laid out path, then you should be following Ashtanga Yoga, the 8-folded or 8-limbed approach to yoga. So that's where you come across all these concepts. I'll not explain them, but just list them out quickly. I assume most of you would be familiar with it. Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. Starting from Yama up to Samadhi, these are the 8 important limbs, not necessarily steps. Steps might imply when you move up, you can forget the previous one, but that is not the case. In fact, it's a family of practices that needs to be taken along together. So Yama focuses on your social conduct, your conduct outside, where it puts certain don'ts. You're not supposed to steal. If you have to be at peace with you, then you should not do certain things. You should not steal, you should not covet, you should not, the don'ts that are there generally, okay? All those are listed under yamas. There are 5 main yamas. Similarly, there are some positive practices that one needs to cultivate. That is niyama. That's the second limb. For example, shaucha, practice of cleanliness. Santosha, practice of contentment. In fact, if you look into the positive psychology today, where there's a lot of discussion that happens around happiness, one of the important ways through which one can increase one's experience of happiness or subjective well-being is through the attitude of contentment. Both contentment and gratitude, they're very closely connected. Okay, so by developing these two, one can have a greater degree of subjective well-being. And you can see that Patanjali is also pointing towards santosha, the development of contentment, where he says santoshad anuttama sukhalabha. That's the definition, explanation he uses. By practicing santosha, you can get to experience sukhalabh, anuttama, unparalleled experience of happiness. And one of the surest means of enduring happiness is contentment. You can notice, you would have noticed in your own experiences. So shaucha, santosha, then you have tapas, focused action, swadhyaya, self-study or self-awareness, Ishwar pranidhana, ability to surrender to a higher force or a higher source. That is niyama. And at the third state, or as a third limb, you're introduced to asana, the practice of a physical posture. Okay. And again, in Yoga Sutra, he doesn't spend much time on the asanas. He just takes around maximum 3 sutras. In the entire 200 sutras, only 3 sutras are dedicated to asana. He just says, what is asanas? Again, one of the beautiful definitions, sthiram sukham asanam. Sthiram is what holds you in a stable condition. Sukham, what allows you to be comfortable. So, you should take a position where you are held in a stable manner and also comfortably. Of course, while I say it, it doesn't mean that you just sit on a sofa or a couch and consider that to be asana. There are other implications that follows. There are other couple of sutras which describe it further or explain it further. The point it's trying to make is, while you put efforts to enhance your strength, flexibility, all those things, but a real asana takes place when you're comfortable in that position, when you push your boundaries and make yourself comfortable as you go along. The moment you experience comfort, that is when that becomes an asana. As long as I'm trying, struggling, however flexible I might be, I might put up a very good show of all these topsy-turvy postures, but that is not necessarily asana. Asana is a place, asana is a space where both body and mind is stable and comfortable. Sthiram sukham asanam. Just 2 words to explain this. And then what actually it leads to is a very insightful statement. I'm a little wary of time, but just to give a quick understanding of it. It says, by the practice of asana, one will overcome the limitedness or the sense of being bound by extreme experiences. So what does it mean? Just to give you a practical example, I don't know how many of you have attended a yoga class or attending a yoga class. Anyone? Yeah. Okay. You might have noticed in an asana class, the teacher, while leading you through the posture, he or she is continuously pushing you beyond your comfort zone. Okay. While doing that, the teacher is also saying, now wear a beautiful smile on your face, right? Is the body familiar with this pattern? When you're in an uncomfortable situation, can the body smile? No. The body is familiar with the situation where body, comfortable or pleasant, smile. If the AC goes off now, then the body will start to frown, right? So body is familiar with one pattern, body, comfortable, uncomfortable, smile. What the teacher is trying to do is help you break that pattern. She or he is forcing you, body, comfortable or uncomfortable, now smile. It is a forceful smile now. Okay? Body is in an uncomfortable position, yet you are asked to smile, which is artificial, which is forceful, but eventually it leads to a state where body, comfortable, not comfortable, doesn't matter, smile. Right? So you're actually breaking old patterns. That's exactly the purpose of asana practice. And one of the sutras there in that context itself makes it very clear what is the purpose is trying to achieve. Okay, to overcome these kinds of limitations that are offered by the patterns. So asana is the third limb. And then going further, it spends a little time on the pranayama practice. Okay. Again, not too many sutras, just about 4 or 5 sutras at most. It says, or it makes it very clear that while body is at one level and the mind is at the other level, and no doubt my focus is on the mind, but if I have to get control or mastery over the mind or even act on the mind, I can use these two tangible instruments. Body is a tangible, concrete instrument. I can get it. I can touch it, feel it. I can. Mind, I can't do that. And similarly, which is not as concrete as the body, but definitely more concrete than the mind, is prana. It identifies this important link. Okay, I need not go to the scientific studies that are happening about the efficacy of working with your breath. There's a lot of scientific studies published all over the world as to how important or what is the kind of impact the breath has over our mind, or specifically on our thoughts, the pleasant mood, the bad mood, how they are connected, the patterns of breathing and the patterns of your mind. What does shallow breathing cause? What does deep breathing cause? All these things have been studied. And recently during COVID also, a lot of these studies were discussed and present, and people were asking, or experts and scholars were asking to people to engage more in terms of their breathing, also focusing on their exhalation. Okay. In fact, a long exhalation has a lot of benefits, both physical and psychological, and of course, spiritual. So this is beyond the discussion of this particular session, so I won't go to the details, but some things like the increase in nitric oxide. The moment you have a long exhalation, nitric oxide increases in the body, and that dilates your veins or vessels through which the blood is carried. The stress levels are brought down. There are multiple such benefits. Okay. So all those things have been discussed and presented in scientific papers. So, but importantly here, in all the yoga texts, starting from the Upanishadic texts, especially one of the earliest Upanishads, Prashnopanishad, starts off this discussion on prana, and then many other texts take it up later. They have realized it long back that this is the important instrument that an individual can work with. And using that, they have developed elaborate methods of working with prana, and that entire tradition is called as pranayama. Okay, and you might be familiar with some of these practices as Anuloma Viloma, Nadi Shodhana, Bhastrika, Brahmari, okay, Surya Bhedana, Chandra Bhedana. So all these are different names of pranayamas, which of course they are not discussed in Yoga Sutra text. Yoga Sutra text only discusses the function of it, how it is done. So then you have yama, niyama, pranayama, and then an important concept called as pratyahara, whereby the mind is drawn inwards. The senses, which are normally outward going towards their respective objects. So here there are suggestions as to how it can be turned inside. And then you have dhyana, where it gets focused on one particular object, and then samadhi, where the individual mind or the individual completely gets absorbed in that object. Again, for the scope of our discussion, I'll keep these three out: dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. But it suffices to say they are important concepts of the Yoga Sutra tradition or the yoga tradition, and they have been discussed to required length in the Yoga Sutra text per se. So these are some of the important concepts that we were seeing. Okay, in that context, we also saw some frameworks emerging, that was Ashtanga Yoga. Going further from Yoga Sutra text per se, we might have also come across different streams of yoga. The one that we saw in the Gita also, where you had Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, all these streams. So we might be wondering, what do they mean? What role do they have to play? And what is the connection between what we are discussing and what they are? So let me just spend a few minutes on that. Again, I think this goes to the relentless quest of the ancestors, for ancestors to understand what could be the best means and methods through which I can transform myself. And they also realized, while this quest was on, they also realized one size fits all does not work, because each one of us have different tendencies, each one of us have different approaches, each one of us have different requirements, and each one might be in a different lap. If we are running a race, especially if you're familiar with the relay race, okay, you have 8 people standing on the tracks, and you enter when the match has already started, when the game has already started, and you enter, and just if you have a superficial perception, you feel, okay, someone in the track 2 might be far ahead, someone in the track 3 might be far behind, but you never know, the fellow in the track 3 might already have finished a second extra round. Okay, you just don't know in which coordinate one is, and depending on what coordinate one is, he or she would require a different kind of support to make that movement. Okay, yoga field recognizes this individual difference. Yoga field recognizes the subjective element, and therefore it has come up with broad streams, giving broad guidelines as to whatever one's coordinates are, whatever one's requirements are, whatever one's starting points are, accordingly, one can begin one's journey. One need not feel limited just because one is not good in something. For example, if I request you to help me with an organization of a conference here next month, and I want you to support me in all ways possible, okay, then some of you might come to me and say, I know some speakers, I know some topics, and maybe I'll put it together and reach out to them. Okay, someone will say, no, I will not worry myself with what speakers, what topics they are going to speak. Like, I'll take care of their conveyance. You just let me take care of their allowance. I'll book the tickets, I'll pick them up, I'll drop, I'll arrange the entire logistics. Someone might say, I'm more happy to serve during lunch period, or I arrange for that. Someone might say, like, each one of you might come with your own strength and say, this is how I can help, right? So this is what yoga field also recognizes. While we are there as an individual, we have different strengths and seats of action. Some of us are primarily body based. Okay, the body comes first, the physical, the material comes first. For some, we are more energetic, like we have strong will, intention, emotion. So for someone, well, body might follow, but someone who drives it is their energy. Okay, someone has very strong energy. someone acts or thinks from the mind. So cognitive ability is his or her strength. For someone else, it is their just ability to serve and help. Bhakti is stronger. For someone else, it is just to act. Don't worry, don't bother me, don't ask me to think. You just let me know what I'm supposed to do. I will do it. Okay, you have all these kinds of peoples in this world. Like if you classify someone who acts from the body, someone who acts from the seat of energy, someone who acts at the higher level, that is either through cognitive ability or through affective or through cognitive. Okay, so these are the three different abilities at the top level, and then at the will and at the bodily level. Okay, so recognizing these differences, I think yoga field has come up with all possible ways to support them with that kind of set of activities in which they are good at. Okay, body can also be an instrument, word can be instrument, thought can be instrument. So using all these things, it has formulated these largely, I would say, 5 streams of yoga. There could be many more smaller and subfields or substreams of yoga, but largely for our discussions to bring them in one classification, these would suffice. What are they? You have Jnana Yoga. Then Karma, Bhakti, Raja, Hatha. Okay, so Jnana Yoga takes this path that through one's cognitive abilities and skills, one can overcome one's limitations. All these paths are helpful to overcome one's limitations, but what is the instrument they are using? That differs. So it says, let me help an individual, allowing him to reason and go beyond the reason to understand what his true nature is. So that is Jnana Yoga. The entire stream of Vedanta, which you can see in as the one school of philosophy, takes this path. It's the path of knowledge. Okay, and then Karma Yoga, it says, we also saw its definition in the Gita here. It says, never mind, I mean, don't mind with what the mind thinks or anything. Let me just get into action or doing things, but doing in such a way that I don't become bound by the consequences of my action. And largely the two principles that need to be followed here is, one is not being limited by the fruit of that action, and second, not doing it with the sense of strong ego agency. Okay, the presence of ego agency and being limited by the fruit of action is how we engage in any action for that matter, but it charts out the path to be able to equip an individual to do an action in such a state that where he's not limited by these two, and that is Karma Yoga. And Bhakti Yoga, it's in simple terms, it takes this position. It's like, I am in a helpless position, I am limited being, and the problems that I have, I am not able to deal with. Let me allow a higher force to help me. Okay, it is just allowing a superior force, a greater force to act through you so that you overcome your helplessness. All the three are helping you to overcome your helplessness. One is you with your cognitive ability, your skills, your reasoning, you're trying to inquire into the roots of the problem and then finding, it's not such a big problem that I cannot face. That is the approach of Jnana Yoga. Karma Yoga says, let me fight it out. Let me do, let me not get bothered with all these considerations. Let me just act, because finally it's in action that you can showcase anything. And Bhakti says, let me draw from a higher force or source and deal with the situation. That is the path of Bhakti. And then Raja Yoga, interestingly, also called as Dhyana Yoga. We saw it in the Gita yesterday. The name of the 6th chapter of the Gita is Dhyana Yoga. Or let me keep it aside, let me go to the Hatha. The Hatha, the meaning of the term Hatha is by force, by application of force. Okay, it chooses body or the matter as its base of action. It says, see, whether I have to use the jnana, karma or bhakti, the physical and the material should be good enough to do that. Let me develop the material to that extent where it becomes ready for the higher purpose. So in order to prepare the material for the higher purpose, Hatha Yoga operates, it chooses its field of activity as the body and the breath. So a lot of all these physical asanas, pranayama, so on and so forth, and various other types of cleansing techniques which are important to Hatha Yoga, they cater to the body and the breath. Okay, so Hatha Yoga primarily focuses on the body. There are also other ways of deriving the term Hatha. There are a lot of discussions and debate also on that. Some people or many people opine that Ha, it's a combination of Ha and Ta sounds. Okay, one each representing two important aspects. For those familiar slightly with the Tantra tradition, you have these forces, Ida and Pingala, or Surya and Chandra. Okay, at the cosmological level. So combining these two energies, the Surya, the solar energy and the lunar energy, combining the Ida and the Pingala, that is Hatha, but we'll keep the whole discussion aside. In a simple translation, Hatha means by application of force. So with the application of a strong determination or a will, you're using your body and breath so that you prepare the body for higher purposes. Finally, this is no need to happen. Finally, it is to equip an individual to overcome his limitations and move towards the Ishwaratva. But for that to happen, one should have a strong physical presence, right? So that is the charter of Hatha Yoga. Now, in between, one is, this is at the higher level, this is at the material level, and not many would prefer Jnana Yoga. Not many would prefer karma. Like there will be small pockets of people who have a natural tendency towards any one of these. Therefore, in this context, if you see here, what Patanjali does is combines all these elements into one highway, one royal path. Okay, all the elements are there. I have part of jnana, I have part of karma, I have part of bhakti. There's also, with reference to asana, there's also part of hatha that has come up. And therefore, he comes up with Raja Yoga, which combines all these elements, but to certain levels. So this, I see this as a bachelor's degree. And this is a master's. You take one of the special routes for specialization. Either you specialize in jnana, karma, or bhakti. This is the before your undergraduation, the kind of preparation, minimal preparation that is required. So once you're prepared, this is what prepares you. So even if you look at the numbers of people who study, anytime, any day, any place, number of people who do bachelor's program is much more compared to the master's program, right? So you have put together all the elements here where anyone can take this up. Despite your specialization, despite your inclination for specialization, anyone can pursue or everyone can pursue. And this is the path of Yoga Sutra. And perhaps that is the reason why it acquires the name Raja Yoga. Raja, otherwise we don't have any clear definition as why it gets the term Raja. In fact, it is used in the Hatha Yoga text, in Hatha Yoga Pradipika, where it says, all our practices in Hatha Yoga is to prepare an individual for Raja Yoga. So it's not an end. When someone takes to the asana practice extreme, it's actually, it's not the end point. In fact, that should lead one towards the next level, that is Raja Yoga. Okay. So Raja Yoga gets its name perhaps because it is a royal path where everyone and anyone can walk. And then can go to the specialized streams of Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga, depending on their inclination and their interests. So this is again a larger framework of yoga that we come across. And as helpful, we have some important texts which highlights these paths. For example, as I said, Gita refers to all of these. And then you have Yoga Sutra, which specifically focuses on Raja Yoga. And for Karma Yoga, again, Gita is the most important text. We don't have any other text, but it's only recently one of the Swamijis of Ramakrishna Ashram has composed a Karma Yoga Sutra Shataka. This is Swami Harshananda, of who was the president of Bangalore Ramakrishna Ashram. He has composed 100 sutras on Karma Yoga. That is a recent text that is available. But traditionally, we go back to Bhagavad Gita. When it comes to Bhakti Yoga, I have a couple of books, important books. One is Narada Bhakti Sutra and Shandilya Bhakti Sutra. And when it comes to Hatha Yoga, or before going that, Narada Bhakti Sutra again has one of the beautiful definitions of Bhakti. At least in the first initial few sutras, if you look into it, what is Bhakti, what is love, how can one elevate love into Bhakti? All such beautiful descriptions are found there. So I will not be going into that at the moment. So you have Narada and Shandilya for Bhakti. Then we saw for Raja, we have Yoga Sutra. For Hatha Yoga, there are good number of texts. And Hatha Yoga also, I want you to note that it draws heavily from the Tantra tradition. Again, this is almost leading to us to the post-classical yoga. After the Raja Yoga text, we can see in the post-Raja Yoga, there is a sort of a inclination towards the more physical aspect also. Perhaps there was already a recognition that body is being neglected. We should do something where it should be an integral approach. I can't negate, I can't leave out something just because I need to realize something higher. The lower one cannot be neglected. Perhaps that was the sense. And in that context, Tantra tradition offers us great insights. The approach of Tantra in simple terms is nothing is not divine in the world. Nothing can be neglected. The so-called things that you call them as bad, negative, or something limited, everything can be transformed into divine. Okay, that is the approach of Tantra in very simple, simplistic terms. Okay, so Hatha draws from the Tantra tradition and brings in all these practices with relate to the body, with relate to prana, the practice of mantra, the practice of usage of sounds. And just in this context, let me say, in the Tantra tradition, you have the Bija mantras related to each one of the chakras. Again, chakra is an important concept. So Tantra tradition identifies that there are significant energy centers within the body, broadly 6 important ones, starting from Swadhisthana to Agnya, and the 7th one at the top. So each of these centers are spaces where energy is blocked to whatever reason. There is a huge potential energy that is there at the basis, that is in the Mooladhara chakra, and through your actions and intentions, you can wake them up. That is called Kundalini. Okay, that is lying down in a coiled serpent. What do you call an energy that gets seated or that's there in a coiled spring? Potential energy, right? So Kundalini is that kind of energy which is lying dormant, which can be aroused through certain conscious actions and efforts, and it raises through various energy centers within the body: Mooladhara, Swadhisthana, Manipura, Anahata, Agnya, and then finally the Sahasrarha. So chakra becomes an important concept in the Tantra tradition, not so much in the Raja, but it is very important in the Hatha tradition. And for each one of the chakras, I want you to note there is an association with Sanskrit sound. There is a Bija mantra associated to each chakra, and each chakras are surrounded by a set of sounds. If you take the Sanskrit alphabets, all the alphabets, 50 odd alphabets, you actually use them as a mantra to go around to do one cycle of chakra movement. And it's a practice that is being done even today, chanting just the sound Sanskrit alphabets. They feel, or the practitioners feel, that is very helpful to work with the chakras. Therefore, you have both bija mantras, one single sound associated with one chakra, but also the whole set of alphabets and the sounds of them associated with all the chakras. So that is the close connection that you can see in the Tantra tradition. And again, Hatha Yoga text, there is one Hatha Yoga Pradipika. I'll just write it in Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Then you have Amrita Siddhi. Then you have Goraksha Shataka. So in this manner, there are about 20 texts, but 4 or 5 are considered to be important. And more so, this particular text, Hatha Yoga Pradipika. So anyone who is practicing yoga, who is deeply interested in yoga, cannot but be acquainted with the text Hatha Yoga Pradipika. So if you now look at this whole spread, right from the etymology, excuse my handwriting, it's also high, then definition, then concepts, then meta concepts or frameworks, or texts. A student of yoga cannot do without Sanskrit. So for a definition of a simple term like yoga, you need the you depend on the etymology that is provided by the Sanskrit. Definitions, of course, a long list I can provide you here. Again, through Sanskrit, when we don't use the right definitions or we don't understand through the sources, there are some dangers. I'll spend a couple of minutes on that. Then you have important concepts, you have to fall back for the Sanskrit. For the frameworks, all these frameworks are available in Sanskrit sources, and the texts which are so important, integral, again, Sanskrit. So for a student of yoga, I think, or if I can say it in other words, Sanskrit not only lives in yoga, it actually thrives in the field of yoga. And all this is in terms of philosophy. I have not gone into the practice part, but just to give you just a taste about it, look at the names of the asanas. Let me know the names of the asanas that you might be familiar. Quickly, 1 or 2. Pavana Mukta Asana, okay. Sarvangasana. Mayurasana. Fine. The list is long, okay. Most of the asanas uses some sorts of prefixes. Ardha, Adha, Kati, Baddha. Okay, Baddha is something bound. Ardha is half. Kati is lateral. Okay, then you have Adho, downward. Okay, so all those prefixes, you are heavily dependent on Sanskrit. And what is more important is, see, there are names like Kaundinyasana, Ashtavakras. Ashtavakra is one of the difficult positions. While I'm saying Ashtavakra, the term itself means deformed at 8 corners or 8 sides. It doesn't mean anything. I actually refer to the story of Ashtavakra, one of the wisest sages who was found in the Janaka's ashram. So I have to tell about Ashtavakra. I have to tell about Janaka. I have to tell about the discussion that took place between Ashtavakra and Janaka. See, just with one practice of asana, how much it is drawing in. When I say Vrikshasana, what is a Vrikshasana? A tree pose. I'll speak about how a tree is grounded, rooted, while rooted yet free with the wings. See how much these Sanskrit words are allowing you to experience and explain these experiences, right? So whether it's the name of the asanas or it is the philosophy, yoga depends heavily on Sanskrit. There's no other go. If I choose an alternative route, which is happening in modern yoga, I'll just give you counter examples. There's an asana called as Adhomukha Shwanasana. And people get to use the easy term downward dog. And afterwards, the downward also drops. It goes to the dogs. And it has happened. For example, we were in a discussion in University of Sapienza in Rome, where there was a roundtable discussion on Yoga Sutra. And the speakers were eloquently presenting that they were discussing on the term Rajanaka, which is used in Raja Yoga texts. They were saying, see here, you use the term Rajanaka, which means ranking royalty or the king, And wherever there is king or royalty, you always have some sort of exploitation, some kind of power structures. So Yoga Sutra or yoga is also a tradition of power structures and exploitation. I mean, this was an actual discussion. Okay. So when you don't get to the right meanings, right sources, a lot of distortion happens. And that's happening. And that distortion leads to beer yoga, nude yoga, all sorts of things which have become popular. Then there is a compartmentalization. You don't see things in unity. In fact, while I'm show them as separate paths, it's just like which is your engine. Whether your engine is Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, but if one engine starts, it pulls all the bogies together. Okay? You compartmentalize things and you also reduce things. Modern yoga is that reduction yoga that you see. And all sorts of things. Oh, Kundalini yoga. And then how? 10 hours. 200 hours, you become a teacher. So it's a highly reduced form because you're not able to go to the roots and understand them in the right form. And with these distortions, with these reductionist approach, with this compartmentalization, it finally leads to mischievous and motivated narratives. I don't know how many of you are following the discussion around yoga happening in last 5 to 6 years. It is precarious to say the least. They're coming up with all kinds of theories. This is in modern scholarship. They're trying to say how yoga is exploitation, how yoga is related to gender violence, how yoga is related to imposing of one particular political ideology. All these are the actual papers that are being published in last 6 to 8 years in the name of yoga humanities. Why? Because you are not able to go to the roots and understand the context. Text and context have to be understood. And for that, Sanskrit is required. So for a student of yoga, Sanskrit is not an option. It is a must. And therefore, Sanskrit is not only living, it is not only surviving, but it is thriving in the field of yoga. What I said was just about the scholars, the modern scholarship in yoga. But whereas when it comes to the practitioner world, they're familiar with a lot of these things. There is a curiosity, there is inquisitiveness. If you see the number of students who are studying Sanskrit has increased, it's likely to be the practitioners of yoga, both in India and abroad. So with this, I'll conclude my today's presentation. Whatever we started to discuss yesterday actually was this particular framework, whether just from the etymology up to the text, yoga is fully dependent on Sanskrit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vinayachandra. It was brilliant and rich as expected. We do not have very much time, but I think if one or two questions are there from our audience. First, offline audience. Anyone? Not particularly. In that case, yes.
Can you please explain some practical aspects of all these 5? Jnana, Karma, Bhakti, and Raja Yoga, and Hatha Yoga.
This one?
In your day-to-day life.
Okay. I mean, each of these streams have come up with their own sets of practices. Won't be able to deal much, but here in the Jnana path, using one's reasoning ability, try to understand what is real, what is not real. In fact, the Vedanta path gives us what it calls as 6-layered practice, okay, where it includes first one is viveka, being able to discern what is true and what is not true, what is essential and what is not essential. And the second one, developing vairagya. And third one, developing or getting into practice what is called shama, damadi, sadhana, shatka, 6 practices. And last one, mukshutva, having a continued, consistent desire to grow and outgrow. Again, a lot of it is through the application of your mind. It's more cognitive in its perspective. Okay. And in karma, it's in any action that I am doing, whether as a student, as a teacher, or whatever my role in life is, doing that role or taking that role in a manner where I don't feel limited by the consequences of my action. Again, I said, working with the ego agency and being mindful of not to be only limited or focused on the fruit or the immediate fruit of that action. That is the approach of karma yoga. Bhakti is being able to let go of things, which must be a conscious practice. Otherwise, it's not possible. While we know that there are problems that we can't deal with, we can't even draw the higher forces because there is also, I don't know, a sense of insecurity to let go. Maybe there's some kind of comfort that I have found in that difficult situation also. So that being able to surrender and let go, that is bhakti. Raja Yoga, the entire set of practices that we discussed, including the asanas to pranayama to meditation, all those things. Hatha, focusing more on the asana part.